All right, Daniel, how do you say your last name? I want to pronounce it correctly.
It's Berezowsky.
Okay, that's where I was going because I have perfect pronunciation as well, but I wanted to make sure to at least hear it from you first before I attempted it. Well, hey, listen, welcome to the podcast. I know again, these are opportunities for us to talk to all the cool people out there, all the dads to be, everyone in our LGBT community and the allies that are deciding to expand their family and hopefully make society a lot better than it is today. So quick question. Are you a cookie fan? Do you eat cookies?
I am a cookie fan. Yeah. What specifically?
Okay, so let me ask you, do you prefer warm, soft cookies or like the room temperature almost? And the reason I'm asking, right, because there's several different types of cookies, right? You've got Oreos that are cookies, but then like my husband Nicholas, he likes to stick cookies in the microwave and make them all soft and gooey and like milk. And I think that's the more, dare I say, traditional way to eat cookies. Is that your experience too?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I really like, well, here in New York is Levain, which is, now become a big brand, but they're just right off the oven. They're chewy. It's a big cookie. Originally, I think made them because a marathon runner was trying to get carbs and more energy, but they became this like very big gooey cookies. I can't have the whole one, but that's what I love, and they're right the perfect chewiness and goo.
Well, that sounds exciting. I like the hard cookies. I know a lot of people laugh at me about it. I also eat cereal without milk. I don't know. Some people may think that's a travesty, but I don't know. I was born and raised in Panama and I used to drink milk there all the time. And then when I came to the United States at the age of 10, the milk situation changed, right? Milk is different in different countries. And so I didn't like the milk anymore, but I still like cereal. So I guess I am 45 now. So for the past 35 years, I've eaten cereal without milk. My husband laughs at me about it. My kid laughs at me about it. I have a 12-year-old. But to that, I say, to each his own. Does that work here too? How do you eat your cereal? Welcome to Fathernetics, Fatherhood Unfiltered. I'm Jameel. Welcome to the podcast.
You could never find somebody do it like me. I'ma turn it all the way up, cause it kamikaze. Go ahead and try, baby. You are gonna see that you'll never ever find somebody do it like me.
Yeah, it's funny because my husband's lactose intolerant. So I also used to buy milk for everything, and I used to make cappuccinos and lattes, and obviously for cereal. And when we got married, and then I was the only one drinking milk, and it was just going to waste. And so I stopped buying milk as well. He likes oat or rice or any of those milks, which I really don't like on my coffee. So I started just drinking black coffee. I guess that's the first sign that I'm getting old, that my coffee's just black coffee, period. But yeah.
Wait, so with oat milk and almond milk, is it really about the taste? Because obviously milk doesn't come from those items.
Yeah, it's funny. I think they call it milk, but it's not really. And it doesn't have, if you're making like a latte or a cappuccino, I at least can't get into froth the same way, and it just tastes funny. And after a certain point, I just gave up, and I said, I'm gonna do black coffee.
So do you have a cappuccino machine at home that you use, kind of like you're an in-house barista? And if that's the case, what's the brand you recommend? Because I don't have one of those, but I have been to friends' houses and they have like the whole setup. And I'm jealous that I don't drink coffee because it looks like it's a whole process and it has to be done a certain way and it's a lot, perhaps.
Yeah, during the COVID years, I went through every single machine and way of making coffee. I think it was just kind of like the thing to do because we were trapped at home. And I started buying just everything from like a cheap coffee maker to I got one more elaborate like espresso machine. It really depends, to be honest, on the day. Sometimes I'm just in a hurry and I just want to click a button and the coffee's there. And sometimes, especially over the weekend, if I take a bit more time, I like to grind the beans and actually pour the coffee and take my time. I'm not fancy and like, oh, my coffee beans have to be from this country and it has to be this type. It's just like if it tastes good, it tastes good. But I think I've gone through every single coffee machine that you can imagine, and my husband's like, you buy one more, you're gonna have to take yourself out of the home to fit it. But
I
yeah,
was
I
just
think
gonna ask you
ultimately
if
I
you
just
were
ended
interested
up
in doing
with.
like a coffee tour out in like Colombia, Argentina, or something. But it sounds like it's indifferent to you. But I mean, it's different if you have to take a tour. That's an excuse to go travel in Latin America.
Yeah, well, I'm originally from Mexico, and it's also a big coffee country. Not as big as Colombia, obviously, but yeah, I think that's a whole other experience.
Okay, well, I'm down. Whenever you decide to go, let me know. We'll pack it up and we'll go together. Go to do some coffee tours. But hey, let me ask, how would you introduce yourself to our audience that's now able to see us as a part of season 2? What who is Daniel? What is Daniel about? Why have you decided to start your Instagram page the way that you have?
Yeah, so I'm Daniel Berezowsky. I'm originally from Mexico, born and raised there. I was born and raised in this wild city. So, when I moved to New York City, people often feel like they're moving into the big city. To me, compared to Mexico City, it wasn't that big, that chaotic. I've been married for 7 years. I've been together with my husband for 14 years. And we decided about what is it, like 4 years ago, that we wanted to start looking into potential opportunities to become parents. And we became very overwhelmed. And the reality is that, at least from our experience, when we try to get information, it seemed like there's a lot of asymmetry in how that information is shared. There's a lot of information that's shared by people who know a lot. You're trying to figure it out. It's a very complex space. And most of the information that you get is from someone who's trying to sell you a service. And so there's a bit of an odd situation where you have clinics or you have agencies, or any type of service provider that's telling you their side of the picture. And at least for me, there were some resources out there, but there wasn't really anything where it was just parent to parent or intended parent to intended parent talking about, here's what the story is like, here's what the journey's like. I saw a lot of Instagram pages that seemed a bit too artificial and like intended parents that had become some sort of like celebrities and or
Hmm.
influencers, and it almost felt too fake, and they were trying to also, I guess, get likes to then be able to get their numbers up, and it started to become like business feel. So I said to my husband, let's just try to tell our story. Originally, we actually thought of a podcast as a way to do it. But as I was telling you before we started recording, my husband's on the shyer side of appearing and having his life become too public. And so I said, okay, if it's just going to be me, it's probably going to not be media, and I'm going to start writing. And so I start writing our story, and I put together that Substack page, Two Dads to Be. And that's been how every week I kind of like force myself to tell a little snippet of our story. Worst case scenario, nobody reads it, and it's just forcing me to become consistent in writing our story to one day tell our kid. Best case scenario, it starts to pick up and people start finding it interesting, and it can help other folks who are just getting started in their journey.
So listen, I think the more information that's out there and available is fantastic. I don't know if you how many episodes you've listened of this particular podcast, but I've said it many a times. When we started our journey as well, there was very limited information out there. And now we see an influx, right? Because now there is there's a higher desire, there's a better opportunity, there are more avenues, there are people coming of age, if you will, that are now looking to expand their families. And as a result, they're sharing their journeys, what they went through, the experiences that they had, the do's, the don'ts, the gotchas, if you will, where it costs more, where it doesn't, and the different avenues, right? Adoption, fertility, surrogacy, and private adoption, as well as fostering to adopt much like I did with my son. So I think the more resources we have out there, the more community that we're able to build, the more handshakes we're able to make, the more people like you that I'm able to have on my podcast so that someone can see that and go, okay, well, where's Daniel's page? Let me go read about that and catch up and better understand what my journey could look like. So hats off to you for taking that step. Is this your first foray into writing, or are you a writer?
I think I've written throughout my life, and I've written professionally for work, but I think it's the first time that I'm putting myself out there and telling our own story, and it does feel a bit vulnerable in a way. I find myself writing and thinking, well, who's going to read this, and what are we going to say, not say? And more often than not, I decide to just go and say, people need to hear the unvarnished version of how things went, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Because again, I think there's a lot of stories out there that just seem like everything went perfect and everything's well, and you see the outcome or the end of the story. But there's the reality, which is this is a challenging journey for a lot of folks, both financially, emotionally. And so I'm trying to write in a way that just helps people out there say, hey, I'm not the only one who's finding this overwhelming to even get started, or I'm not the only one who's finding it a bit too difficult to cope with as you go into this world that is entirely different or new to you as you start trying to become a parent. And I really appreciate what you're saying about it's one way to become parents, right? It's everyone has their own way into parenthood. There's different avenues, there's different ways that you can become parents, and by all means, I'm not saying ours is the right way or the way that is the easiest or the way that it should be. It's just one version of the story. And so by sharing it, and you also share yours, and there's other parents who share theirs, hopefully people who are just getting started in understanding this space can see, okay, what are my options out there, and what are my options depending on where I live, and depending on my financial situation, and depending on what I want my family structure to be like. So I think that's the attempt.
Okay, so now that you've confirmed that your way is the only way and everyone else is doing it wrong, what would you say is the top two that you've come across so far, right? The best advice that you could give for someone that just made a decision to expand their family, right? I know a lot of people starting the process are like, okay, where do I even start? Where do I go? What's the right website that's going to treat me right, or give me the right information, or give me options between, surrogacy or adoption? Or so I guess again, my question is, what are the top two that you've come across that you would recommend to other people that are just starting their journey?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of information out there for sure. Depending on where you live, obviously the Men Having Babies conference is a good resource. I think they as a nonprofit do a pretty good job at bundling things together and giving folks the information. I will also be perfectly honest, when I went to my first Men Having Babies conference, I found it to be overwhelming. I remember Jaime, my husband, and I went to our first conference back in 2022, and we got there, and it just felt like a big marketplace. I know that the MHB folks are a nonprofit and they're doing their best to get the information out there, but the truth is that it's also a space where you have all the service providers and they're all trying to pitch you a service. And I remember going around to the different tables because the first question that we had was, well, if surrogacy could be a journey, what's the total cost of this whole thing? And every person would have their own figures, and they would also have their own caveats in saying, well, what I'm telling you is for this little part of the journey. It's not for the whole thing. And so we couldn't get the answer to like, what's the whole figure? What's the total bottom line number, so that we could actually say, do we have that in the bank or do we not? Or do we see ourselves having that in the bank someday in the next couple of years? And so we went through the different tables, and we stopped at one of the tables with one of the agencies. And I just said to this person who was there, hey, listen, I'm trying to understand what the entire cost of this is, to just see if this is for us. And this person's response, I think, really lacked empathy. Maybe it was the end of the day. Maybe he was just tired after a whole day of pitching their services. But he basically said, "Yep, surrogacy is not for everyone, and if you don't have that money in your account, or if you don't see yourself having that money in your account, then it's probably not for you." And I was just overwhelmed by how easy it was for him to dismiss me as, well, if you're not going to buy my services, then you might as well not waste my time. I think at that point, Jaime and I just left the conference. There was like 3-day conference. We stopped a day and a half and said, we don't want to come back because there's no way that we're going to get that amount. I think at the time it was like $8,000 to $200,000 for the whole journey. And we said, it's just not going to happen for us. And so we left the conference, and we found it very overwhelming, and we had to sit for a year. And so I'm saying all of this because you're asking about resources. And so we started exploring what else was out there. We started reading a couple of books about surrogacy and the different aspects of surrogacy. We looked into adoption. And I think we came back to the MHB conference 1 year later with a very different perspective, because we were able to come in and at least know the different components of it and the different pieces of it, and be able to say, well, it's true that it's an expensive process, but there's resources out there and there's a way to take it one step at a time. And then we were able to come back to these different tables and ask very specific questions that could help us figure out, is there a path for us? So I think that generally going to these conferences is good, but I would suggest to people, inform yourselves first, do a little pre-reading first, know what you're looking for, and then go to these conferences and ask the questions. Because if you step in and just try to take it all in with all the information that they give you and all the services that are out there, it can become very emotionally tolling if you're getting started.
So when it comes to sticker shock, because I think a lot of people starting this process may not be aware of the potential cost, and it's a big, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a big number, not number, but I can't think of the word right now. So the beginning and the end of the number, right? So it can be anywhere between 100 range. Wow, it's too early in the morning. So, okay, so it can be a big range, $100,000 to $200,000, $250,000, depending on what's going on, how many times you got to repeat things. Some things don't work and have to be done differently. So I understand I understand why it would be a redundant cost, but I think many people probably go into this thinking 50,000 maybe somewhere. We're going to need to start saving once we gather enough information to know what we want to do. It sounds like a lot of the time it's just really sticker shock. Hey, by the way, you need $180,000 on Tuesday in your account. You may not spend all of it in one shot, but you need it in escrow somewhere to at least signify that you're ready to go through this process. What can people do to get that money? I mean, it's, in my mind, I'm thinking, wow, I gotta save for it. So this is like 5 years out if I've got to save that much to be able to start this process. Or are there services out there that says, here's a grant, here are some financial services, some aids? Is it really a loan? Is it all 5 of those things combined, and you're going to be paying off this plus whenever you have the kid 5 years from now, which is an additional expense? What do you say to that?
Yeah, it's tricky because I think it is. I mean, we shouldn't lie in saying this is affordable and this is not expensive, but it's also true, I think, that you don't have to wait to have the full amount in your bank to get started. I think that's what made the difference for us, that we heard it's 200K, it's 250K, it's 180K. Like, nobody gave you a figure, but it felt initially like you just have to save, have the money, and then once you have the money, then you can get started. And what happened to us was that we'd say, okay, it's this much. Then we'd come back a year later and say, okay, we were able to save some of that, but then we'd see that the services had increased in cost too. And so the way that inflation was hitting the cost of this was higher than us being able to save for it. So we decided to just get started. And we said, we need to get started with something. It doesn't have to be the entire thing. And the good thing about surrogacy, surrogacy is it's an odd process in a way, because there's a part of it that you have to just relent your ability to control things. You're not going to be able to control many steps during the journey, but there are things that you can control. And a lot of what you can control is the pace at which you go through the journey. So I would say to folks out there, you don't have to do the entire thing from start to finish, and you can start to take some steps. For instance, if you're going to go with a clinic and do the IVF, you can start the IVF process, get those embryos produced and then frozen, and then you can wait and save some money before you take the next step of actually getting a surrogate. So when we signed on with our agency, they said exactly that. You know, if you don't have the entire amount and you just want to get started with the clinic, once your embryos are frozen, if you want us to wait and pause and say, we're not going to present you profiles, surrogate profiles, until you feel a bit more comfortable with the funds, then we can totally do that. It doesn't have to be from start to finish. And in any case, what folks also don't realize often is that this takes a lot of time just by the nature of supply and demand of when surrogates become available. And so it is going to be probably from the beginning, from the moment you start, a year and a half, 2 years before you have to give that bigger amount, or at least it was for us, where it is you found an actual potential carrier, and now you have to sign the contract, and now you have to put the money into escrow with them. So it does give you a bit of time to save money as well. It's not just going to be a few months; it's potentially going to be years. Um,
So
and then there's
what are the steps, right? When we for an analytical mind like mine, and I'm sure it's probably the same for you, we tend to want to write things down and spreadsheets and PowerPoints and all that other stuff, right? What are the steps that you would take if you're going down the route of IVF surrogacy?
Yeah, I would say first, there's a couple of things you have to figure out. One is, are you gonna want to do this on your own, or are you gonna want an agency to support? I think that can cost, that can be a big difference in terms of cost. Doing your journey solo, like if now that we are in the middle of the process and we've understand the different steps, I think we would be a lot more comfortable saying if we were to have a second child, we probably don't need an agency to go through the entire thing, because now we understand the steps. But I can very much understand why folks who are getting started at the very beginning are, it's overwhelming. You don't know what steps you're taking or what steps you're missing, and an agency provides that. Let me guide you through the process. But it doesn't have to be the case for everyone. So the first question I would ask is, do you have time and resources to be able to figure some of these things out on your own? Because it does really become a bit of a second job if you're not doing this with an agency. You have to figure out lawyers, you have to figure out clinics, you have to figure out escrow. Once you do choose if you're going to do it solo or with an agency, the other big part is a clinic. I think typically you have two parts that you're working with: the agency that's going to help you find a potential surrogate or gestational carrier, and then the clinic that's going to help you create the embryos that you're going to use to eventually transfer to your surrogate to become parents. And they sometimes work together, but they don't have to be a bundle, right? So you can also say, I'm going to start with a clinic. I'm going to get the clinical part, get started with that. And that gives you the opportunity to go through the IVF process, make a lot of decisions about who's going to be the bio dad. Are we going to try to both be bio dads, find an egg donor, and then create the embryos? While you wait for a gestational carrier match, and whether you're doing it with an agency that's actively looking for one for you, or you're independently trying to figure out who's going to carry your child, that's typically going to take a bit more time for you. So I would always say try and start with a clinic first in getting that piece started, because it's probably going to give you enough momentum. What I'll say is, in my case, I wanted to feel, I mean, maybe it's just it's nonsensical from a rational perspective, but we wanted to feel like we were making progress and, being able to cross things off the list early on and say, okay, we've done some of the tests that we need to do to see if we can even become dads, or we've found a clinic, or we've just crossing those milestones felt like, okay, we're not just dreaming about this. We're not just thinking about this in theory. This is actually getting started. To us, that felt important. And so I would say to folks, even if it's small steps, even if it's one or two small things that you can do to stop one day we're going to do this, and it might be in a few years, and just say, we've started and now let's figure out the rest. I think that to us gave us a bit of momentum to not just continue procrastinating year over year of maybe this is not for us.
Yeah, I think that was a good explanation, because I think a lot of people just need to compartmentalize what goes into that giant amount. I think when you get that, oh, this may cost $150,000, it's in everybody's mind, it's like you need to have all of that now, as opposed to all of the things that you just mentioned. You can do some of the upfront stuff now, and then once you get into the part where you can't, well, I guess you could back out at any point, but once you get into the point where you're in it, then you'll be a little bit more stable. Maybe the number is a little bit more palatable at that point. No, again, this is all, I've talked to so many people about this before, and every time I have a conversation with them, it's a little bit different. And the nuances are so exciting to hear, because I know other people will hear this as well and probably have similar reactions to me, where they're like, okay, that's an aha moment for me. So where exactly are you guys thinking geographically, if you will, of kind of doing this whole process when you've identified a surrogate?
So just to give you an update of where we are, we already have a gestational carrier. We decided to go the US route. For a couple of reasons. We were both originally from Mexico, and we did consider Mexico, obviously as a potential opportunity. We're also both human rights practitioners, and so there's an added layer that we wanted to conduct our due diligence and make sure that we were doing this in a way that would respect everyone's rights, and that would bring every party that was going to come to the table in a true form of equal rights and equal consent. And I'm not saying people who go to Mexico don't do that, but there's an added layer of complexity when you're going abroad, because around the world, there's many opportunities with different countries. But the reality, too, is that there's a lot of inequality in when you go to other countries in the relationship that intended parents may or may not have with potential carriers. There's, in the worst case scenario, people who are coming to this without having any form of consent to become gestational carriers, or, that are coming to this out of pure necessity and financial strain and need. And we wanted to make sure that that was not the case for either our egg donor or our gestational carrier, that both of them were coming to this for the right reasons, and that they were coming because they wanted to help build a family, and they were not coming out to this process. Obviously, they're getting compensated for this, but that compensation wasn't the reason alone for why they were doing this. So we ended up choosing the US because it gave us the highest level of transparency and understanding, and be able to say, we're going to choose an egg donor and be able to have a conversation with the egg donor before we decide to go with her, and make sure that she's comfortable and that she's actually doing this for the right reasons. And same with the gestational carrier. We heard crazy stories from friends who were going through the process and would say, yes, I'm going to this country or that country, and it's pretty quick, and you just, you do the process and you get started, 10 months later you have a kid. And we'd say, okay, that seems a bit odd. How are these agencies getting their gestational carriers, and what due diligence are they conducting? Or, folks who would not be allowed to contact their gestational carriers throughout the process, or know their gestational carriers throughout the process. So all of that seemed to us a bit like maybe there's not something right going there. And then there's a legal part, right? I think my husband's a lawyer, and at least in Mexico, he very well understood that while there's been a lot of parents who've successfully become parents in Mexico through surrogacy, it's a bit of a gray zone with the legal part in Mexico, because what happens is that you have to, as soon as your child is born, go to court and then get a judge to um, give you the right to become the parent of that child. But you never know if that judge is going to say yes or no. So there's some precedent, but not a solid precedent for people to be comfortable and say, yes, it's always going to happen. So we also got a bit nervous about, is our child going to end up in some sort of limbo where our child is born, our parenting rights are not recognized? So ultimately, I think from a legal perspective, the U.S. and some states in the U.S. also gave us a level of comfort to say this is well documented here and there's a lot of precedent, and that's why we ended up choosing to stay here.
Okay, fair enough. I've heard so many conversations from folks who've ventured abroad, from Canada to Colombia to, the UK, and the different pros and cons of thinking or reviewing those options. And certainly Ireland is going through its own processes as well. If you've heard the interview that we've had with some of those creators on this show, I guess one of the questions that I would ask is, as an intended parent, where do you think you get your fatherhood energy from? Did you have a phenomenal connection with your dad? Um, Perhaps, there are some that did not and still come out finding the positives out of that, right? So I say good, bad, or indifferent. There are still individuals in this world that have come out and said, yeah, I'm not a dad yet, but this is how I've become the person that I am today, which would then lean heavy into being a dad in the future. So my question is, how did you get that je ne sais quoi? I wanted to use that word, so I just threw it in there.
Yeah. um, yeah, it's an interesting question. I think when Jaime and I sat down over coffee and said, well, are we really going to do this? I think to me, it was very clear that I wanted to become a dad and that I've always wanted to become a dad since I was very young. I knew that it was just the path that I wanted to go through. I think in his case, it wasn't that he didn't want to become a dad, but it wasn't an obvious next step for us. And so he asked, why do you want us to become parents? And also, he's the oldest in his family out of three kids. I'm the youngest in the family out of three kids. So he also, I think, comes in a very different way into this world of parenthood, because he saw his younger siblings growing up. He was a lot more in the eyes of someone who was seeing his own family child being born and then growing. He's 8 years older than his brother, so it gave him a bit of perspective. Whereas I was the youngest. My brother and sister are 9 and 11 years older than I am. So I was always the child. I never saw children in my family. So it's odd. To him, it was more of a profound question of, do we want to become parents and why do we want to become parents? To me, it was a bit of more of an intuition. And then in the question of what sort of parents do we want to become, I think there's a lot of reflections that this process has had us do. I think the joy, I guess, in having a process that doesn't last just 9 months, but it lasts 3, maybe 4 years, is that you have a lot of conversations with your spouse or partner and saying, what sort of parents do we want to be? What are the good things that we learned from the way our dads or moms raised us that we want to replicate? And what are the sorts of things that we definitely don't want to do? In my case, I think I'm very fortunate that I have wonderful parents. But you also, I think, recognize when you're in this, starting to become a parent, even if we're not there yet, there's a certain sense of humanity that you recognize in your parents that you probably didn't see it before, which, you always go and see, that's my mom, that's my dad, or those are my parents. But you start recognizing them just as human beings who are making decisions the same way that we are right now, with the information that they had at hand when they became parents, and just trying to do their best. And sometimes those decisions were either well informed or not necessarily well informed, or they just did things with what they thought was best at the time. And I think something that we've thought of quite deeply is ultimately if your parents are doing things for the right reasons, even if the way they did them didn't ultimately become the right way to do something, they did it out of love and they did it out of love for their children. And so there's no harm in doing these things, even making mistakes when that's what's the case, right? And so I hope that we can become parents that have that as a philosophy, that we're always going to have our love for our kids as the way forward. And it doesn't mean that we're always going to get it right, but as long as it's coming from a place of love and it's coming from a place of truly trying to guide this child through life in the best possible way, then I think that's all you can really do as you become a dad.
So do you see or notice any characteristics of your dad in you as an adult today?
Absolutely. Both as my dad and my mom. I think my dad's on the more rational side. I think he likes to think things through 1,000 times before he commits to making a decision. And I think I'm sort of like that. I think my mom has learned throughout her life not to worry ahead of everything, but she does tend to worry quite a bit of like the what ifs. And I catch myself also worrying and panicking about the what ifs. Jaime is a good balance in that way because he always is a more grounded, well, things haven't happened yet, so why are you panicking about something that it hasn't happened and it's not going to happen? So I think I've learned from both of them in trying to think of what I want to carry forward with our family and what I definitely don't want to carry forward. And I think that anxiety of approaching life through fear is something that I definitely don't want to carry forward. But choosing some of the characteristics of thinking things through and really thinking through love is something that I've definitely learned from them, and I would want to carry forward with me.
So thinking about Mexico tends to the families are really well woven together. Some of them are really large. Mom tends to be a fantastic cook. Is that true in your world?
Absolutely, my mom's both a good cook and a good baker, and that's the way she expresses love. Both in making food, cooking, baking for us, but also teaching us how to bake or cook as a way of sharing her love and her identity with us. So yeah, 100%.
Okay, what does mom cook that you enjoy? What comes to mind when you think, okay, mom's gonna cook for her? Maybe she doesn't cook anymore, but maybe she did something all the time that you were like, okay, this is gonna be it.
Yeah, it's interesting. When the pandemic hit back in 2020, we were here in the US. My parents are from Mexico, but they now live in Vancouver in Canada. And we couldn't get across the border to go and visit them. And, the pandemic made it so that we couldn't see them for a year and a half. Teaching us how to cook and bake was their way to just have a moment with us. And so every week, she would give us a list of ingredients and we'd get them. And then we would start like a Zoom call and she would teach us like the step by step of how to bake or how to cook a special dish. And so for a few months, every Saturday was her teaching us how to bake her latest, she bakes a lot of sweet bread, Mexican sweet bread, and that's something that is not readily available here. So that's was just a little, taste of her and family while we couldn't see each other. And then on the cooking side, all the Mexican food, salsa verde and everything that you do with mole, it's her own special recipes. She's one to not write things down and just, she knows everything in her head and she knows the right amount in her head. So it drives me nuts sometimes that I'm trying to like pin it down and say, but how much do you put of this or that? And she's just like, you'll know, you'll know that it's right. So I think that sort of intuition, I guess, is hers and her own. But we really enjoy that moment of just connecting with her and with the family as we couldn't see each other in real life.
Signs of a good cook. If she can teach others, that's a sign of a good cook. If you get an opportunity to write it down, so that you can pass it on, try to do that. I know it's hard to do because I think I'm more like your mom. I cook and I just throw things in, and if it comes out great, great. If it doesn't, then we just try again, different portions until it tastes right. Sometimes in the midst of it, sometimes after the fact when my husband goes, "This is not it." So I appreciate his candor, but at the same time, they're just little things that you can continue to have in your family archive and pass down. I think cooking is central to any family. So hats off for being able to do that. So what do you guys do before this journey started, right? How'd you guys meet? What are some of the awesome vacations that you got to take? And what are some of the things that you endeavor to do that potentially you want to get out of the way before your family lands?
Yeah, Jaime and I met back in high school actually. He's a year younger, so he was a class behind, and we knew of each other, but we didn't, we were both in the closet and we didn't think of each other as anything but just friends. Then years went by and we reconnected, and he reached out, I think, on Facebook. We started having a conversation on Facebook, and then one thing led to another, and think it really helped that we were both going through our own reckoning of coming out of the closet, but first to ourselves and then to our families, and having each other for that process really became a way for us to bond, and then eventually that became a relationship. We were together. We started dating when I was living in Vancouver, so we were started dating long distance for a few months, and then I went back to Mexico to live there. And that's where we actually started our relationship. We then got to move to the U.S. for grad school. That's when we got engaged. And 3 years later, we got married. Our marriage story is actually an interesting one because we were denied the right to marry by the Mexican government because we were a same-sex couple, and we went and fought the government, and we went to the courts and we sued the government. Eventually, we won the case, and so we became the first same-sex couple to get married under Mexican federal law back in 2018. And so that set a little precedent for other couples around the world who are both from Mexico and are trying to get married under Mexican law. And yeah, we've been here ever since. And in terms of your question about what are we trying to get out of the way, it's an interesting one, because everyone sort of warns you of how much your life changes once you become parents. I think we have never been the type to like go out clubbing till 4 a.m. and do like crazy weekends. But all of a sudden we're feeling like, maybe we should go out at night more often while we can, or maybe we should travel a bit more while we can. But I think we're both in the mindset of our life is going to change, and it's going to change radically in a way that we can't even imagine just yet. And we're ready to embrace that. The big question for us now is, do we stay in New York City? New York City has been home for us for almost a decade, and we love it, and I think it's wonderful. It's also really expensive for families, childcare, and just life in general. And, moving to a bigger place is definitely a high cost. So we're trying to figure out, do we and can we stay in New York City and afford the life of 3 instead of 2? And then the other part is, even if we end up saying, yes, we can make it work, is New York City the city where we want to be carrying a stroller up and down the subway, and the craziness of the city? So there's a part of us that says absolutely yes, we can't think of ourselves anywhere else, and there's a part of us that is trying to thinking, well, maybe this is a good moment to transition to a different place, a different city, a different town, and that may also be a big change for us. So I think we know there's change in the air. We know it's changing in 1,000 different ways, and we're just trying to take it one day at a time.
Well, you guys are certainly asking the right questions, because yes, life will change. I see it. I have a 12-year-old. I've had my kid for over 8 years. We got him when he was 4 years old out of the foster care system here in Arizona. And our life, at the earlier part changed, but it's really about a pause in some of the things that you get to do independently. Like traveling, it's really a pause. It's really about relearning how to travel with a kid now, as opposed to just being adults and being able to just go wherever you want, whenever you want. You have someone else to think about. So that's the change that I would say to look forward in almost anything in life. It's really about how to continue to exist plus one, and that plus one's kind of view on life that you want to make sure they experience the world now becomes the bigger percentage. So yeah, is New York City the best? I don't know. A lot of people do it, right? But does that make it right? I don't know. Is it right for you? I don't know. We've had some people on this podcast who've raised kids in New York, and they did fairly well. Obviously, they had their kids going to like private schools and and things of that nature, and really had to care for how they were going to get there on the subway. And so it's traversing a very metropolitan ready city, as opposed to where we live here, where you can walk everywhere and there are lots of neighborhoods, and public transportation really isn't a thing because it's not necessarily needed. There's a high school on the corner right next to the middle school that he would go to, right next to the elementary school that he would go to. So it's like, it's all kind of planned for kids, for
Yeah.
families. So, something to think about for sure. And I know a lot of people have questions about having conversations, about spitballing with others, about hearing others' perspectives on what that would look for, what that would look like. Not necessarily to say it's right or wrong, but to say, what are the questions people are asking when they're thinking about having kids? So I think that's a good question to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we are both grateful that we were born in a big city, in a big chaotic wild city that is Mexico City, and that's sort of, that's where we were born and raised, and that sort of prepared us when we moved to New York City, as I was saying before, to not feel overwhelmed by moving into the big city. And I think there's something great about, kids who are born and raised in big chaotic cities, that they're not scared about the wildness of a big city later on in life. And at the same time, because we were in these crazy cities, we didn't get to experience a lot of the riding our bike to school type of thing. And so we're also thinking, is that something that we'd like for our family in the future and for our kids? And then the other thing is, I think this is starting to put a lot of things into perspective, because we both, for instance, travel a lot for work. And we tend to say yes to whenever work says you have to go to this place or that place, because work has to come first, and if it's an obligation, you have to. And so now that we're about to become parents, and that is forcing us to reconsider, do we really have to go on that work trip? Do we really have to commit to this work thing or that work thing? And it's sort of, now it doesn't become the most important thing, and you're actually allowing yourself to say no, or to put your family first in other situations you wouldn't have done that originally. It sort of makes you realize, what you thought were priorities number 1, 2, and 3 before are not necessarily going to be priorities number 1, 2, and 3 in the future. And that's a healthy thing. I think that's healthy for us to grapple with. And it's probably going to be tough at the beginning, trying to make things work. But I really appreciate that it's forcing us to say, well, maybe being, maybe putting work first for everything is not necessarily the healthiest, and has never been the healthiest. But now that you're a parent, it kind of like forces you to say, well, I don't have a choice. And so I think that's a good thing.
Well, it also makes you consider several different things. Back in the day before women had equal rights, they were often terminated or downsized for being pregnant, for exactly what you're referring to, right? They're now going to have to start saying no to ABC activity that they used to do at work. And, if they were going for like executive positions, but they were pregnant, they wouldn't get the job because you would have to be out for 9 months, or you'd have to prioritize your family. So I think that obviously society is further along than that, which leads me to one of my last questions here. How familiar are you with how your job will allow for you to exist in that nature? Do they have parental leave? I know a lot of companies are working on being progressive in that manner, and some companies do, some companies don't.
Yeah, and I think that's what we've realized as we've now entered this next phase in our journey, which is actually getting ready to become parents and thinking about a due date and thinking about the logistics. And the reality, I think, is we live in New York State, which gives you some protections under the law, and so we're better off in a way that than other folks in other states. But I have colleagues in different countries in Europe where both mom and dad, regardless of the gender of the parent, they get 6 months, they get a full year. It's I think one of the fights that we still need to fight as same-sex couples to be recognized in parenthood, because the reality here in the US is that, it's crazy. I think in some cases you get nothing or you get a couple of weeks. And then what do you do with a child who's 2 weeks old when both of you have to go to work? And it's to your earlier point about women's rights. Ironically, I think the fight for parental leave, for equal parental leave, is very pro-feminist, because it doesn't put the burden or the assumption on, well, you're the woman, so you're the one who has to end up several months taking care of the child, or with the obligations or responsibilities of a child. In our case, obviously, there is no woman in the relationship, but it just means that we end up with a few weeks of parental leave, and then we have to figure out, what do we do with a child that's a few weeks old? So yeah, I think we still need to understand what that's going to be like, but it's a huge place to continue to do advocacy, because the reality for same-sex couples is that we don't have the same rights as non-same-sex couples when it comes to being able to take care of your child and bond with your child, and have that space for the first few months while you're trying to figure things out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, hey, listen, I expect to have you back on the show a month after you've become parents so that we could talk about how much things have changed in the first 4 weeks, which is probably everything, right? But I think that'll be an exciting opportunity to kind of get a before and an after. There are a lot of parents out there today. There are a lot of intended parents out there today that are on this journey. They all started it different. There are different parts of their journey, but they're all sort of excited about what is to be. And so am I. I'm privileged to be able to speak to someone like yourself, Daniel, who is on this side and will soon be on the other side, because I think that difference in life visibility needs to be accounted for, at least at the moment that it happens. I can tell you life changes, but it changed for me 8 years ago, so it's a little bit different for me to try to describe now as opposed to in the moment. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure that, if we are to talk a few months from now or a year from now, I'm going to look back and say, what was I thinking? What I said makes no sense. That's life, isn't it? That we all look back and realize that our younger selves or earlier selves didn't know what was going on, and we were trying to just make things work.
you can go back and
But there's
revise your
something about
writing.
being
You can
gentle
just
to
delete a
your
couple lines.
yeah, absolutely. But there's something about like being gentle to your past selves. I think at least I tend to be quite harsh with myself of like, why did I make that mistake? Why did I say that? And you're just trying to figure out what the best information that you have at the time. So yeah, I think it's going to be fun to look back at this conversation in a few months or a few years and say, how have things truly changed?
Be gentle to yourself. Take your advice, because as parents, we make so many. I wouldn't even call them errors. There's just so many opportunities to course correct that you have to kind of be gentle with yourself, because we never get it right the first time. Everybody's kid is different, and they'll say do this, and your kid's like, I don't want that, and then you're like, well, what do I do? And you have to change. And even as they become talking age and they understand the world better. And mine's a teenager now. So there's a lot of, I know I said that, but now we have to change course and go. You just have to be okay with things not being the same all the time. So get comfortable with that. I put that out there for you so you can be at peace with it early. Just kind of take it all in. But Daniel, I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
really appreciate
This
that.
was fantastic. I'm not exactly sure when this is going to air, but for anybody that's listening, this is going to be fantastic as an opportunity to better understand where you could potentially start Daniel's page, by the time that this goes up, will continue to have more information for plugin. And keep me honest, Daniel, they can reach out to you on your Instagram or through other resources and ask questions as well. You're open to that, right?
Absolutely. We've put on the 2datstobe.com. So 2datstobe.com is that it redirects you to our Substack and our Instagram page. I also put together a couple of resources that I thought would have helped me when we were getting started. So, for instance, we started a spreadsheet that just lists out all the costs that we've gone through, so that people understand and have a checklist of things that they'll have to think of if they're starting their journey, and a couple of additional resources of how do you choose a clinic versus an agency first, or the other way around. So I'll continue to try and write those out for people, and just it's an open source of information for folks. And yeah, please reach out if I can ever be a resource to others who are just getting started, whether it is with information or just a bit of empathy. I'm happy to do that.
Awesome. Well, best of luck to you and your husband and your to-be child. Oftentimes I hear of twins popping up, so I don't know. Maybe that's in your future.
We'll see. I think one is more than enough with how overwhelming it'll be, but we'll see.
Fair enough. Thank you, sir.